Alright everybody, welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be ranking all the theatrically released Star Wars movies. So that includes episodes 1 through 6, the Star Wars The Clone Wars animated movie from 2008, the sequel trilogy Rogue One and Solo. So that's 12 movies in total. This is my list, my opinion. This is not objective. This is just my opinion on all the Star Wars movies. We're going to be starting off with number 12, which is Star Wars The Clone Wars. I saw this movie for the first time when Disney Plus released, and I was disappointed to see that what people said about this film was true. So this movie was supposed to be the first few episodes of the Clone Wars TV show, but somebody decided to make it into a movie, and it just feels completely different. It just feels completely different tone-wise than any other Star Wars film. It's Ahsoka is an unlikable character here. I hear great things about the TV show. I've never actually watched the Clone Wars TV show, because it's so long. I hear after the first 2 seasons, it gets really good. But yeah, Ahsoka's really unlikable here. The plot is a rescue mission for Jabba the Hutt's son, who they refer to as Stinky. And it also has like Jabba the Hutt's uncle with like this weird accent, and he speaks English, and the whole plot is just bland and uninteresting. So number 11 is going to be Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. When I was rewatching all the Star Wars movies before Rise of Skywalker, I was really surprised with the prequels in general. My entire life I have said Attack of the Clones was the worst Star Wars movie, but I almost put The Phantom Menace lower. Ian McGregor as Obi-Wan is enjoyable in this film, and seeing Palpatine's rise to power is great. Anakin's first signs of evil when he finds his dead mother is a nice plot point, and I think that was done well. The negatives of this movie are absolutely horrible, though. The entire movie feels like actors plastered onto a green screen. There are few scenes that actually feel real. Another large issue that is really present in all Star Wars movies is the dialogue, and it doesn't help. Besides Ian McGregor and Ian McDermott, the acting is bad. Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman have absolutely no chemistry in this movie, and that's kind of necessary when you have a relationship that the rest of this trilogy is going to be built around. Star Wars has never been known for having good dialogue. Even if you look at A New Hope, the dialogue isn't the greatest. But in this film, there's nothing good to overshadow the bad dialogue. Not to mention that Anakin and Padme's relationship is, just the cringiest aspect of this movie. It causes some of the most unwatchable scenes in Star Wars. Like, it is truly a pain to get through this. There's also not really a central plot line that the movie focuses on. The villain doesn't appear until far too late until the movie, and the final lightsaber fight is one of the worst Star Wars has seen. I think this movie is a prime example of one of the main problems with the prequels. The Clone Wars should have been the looming threat. With all the talks about them in A New Hope, this would have been really interesting to see. Instead, we got 2 films with no main threat and 2 boring and uninteresting plots. Attack of the Clones is probably the hardest Star Wars film to watch, being both boring and incredibly cringeworthy. Number 10 is going to be Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. As I said earlier, I almost put this at the bottom of the list. I always remember that The Phantom Menace had the final battle, which brought it up from Attack of the Clones. Rewatching this film, the duel was much worse than I remembered. Don't get me wrong here. It's choreographed incredibly. But when you realize you don't care about any of the characters or what happens to them, the duel loses all of its meaning. The young Anakin doesn't really bring anything to the story. He's just an annoying, Force-sensitive kid. It isn't even Jake Lloyd's performance that's bad, it's the direction from George Lucas. The age difference between Anakin and Padme also adds an extra layer of creepiness in Attack of the Clones. This film also has outdated CGI. While you can watch movies like Empire and the practical effects will still hold up in 10 years, the CGI just wasn't good enough in 1999 for The Phantom Menace to still hold up today. The film relies heavily on CGI, so it creates bad-looking scenes because of this early use of CGI. Everything that has been said about the Gungans has already been said, so I'll just skip over that monstrosity. The entire climax of this movie is bland. I've already talked about the final duel, but Anakin accidentally getting on a fighter and accidentally destroying an entire Trade Federation droid control ship. It's just some ridiculous writing. It's some of the most ridiculous in any Star Wars movie. And I still can't believe that nobody questioned the fact that this 10-year-old who had never flown a spaceship before all of a sudden became the best pilot in the Galactic Republic. Overall, this movie was completely unnecessary to the plot of the prequels. As I've said before, I can't help but wonder what the first two prequels would have been if the Clone Wars was the main threat. Coming in at number 9 is Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. This is the most divisive film in the Star Wars saga. I personally think it has a fair share of mistakes, but was by no means the worst Star Wars movie. The entire thing just felt like a bad fan fiction. There isn't nearly enough explanation to show how Luke, the most optimistic person in the entire galaxy, the only one who saw good in Darth Vader, who was the most evil person there was. Everybody saw Darth Vader as just this huge evil monster. Yoda and Obi-Wan wanted Luke to kill Vader, and Luke was the only one who saw good in him and brought him back to the light. There's no explanation as to how Luke, the person who did all that, tried to kill an innocent kid. He's the most optimistic person in the galaxy, and then he sees a flicker of darkness and Ben, and he just goes and tries to kill him. There's not enough explanation here. There was so much potential with Luke's character, and it was all thrown out the window. It also doesn't make sense that this hermit, who doesn't want to be found, left a complex map to find him. Which was the entire plot of The Force Awakens. Luke Skywalker was this huge thing in The Force Awakens. Everybody wanted to find him, and he left this huge map, and it just doesn't make sense. The resistance in this movie is also boring, and I didn't care about any of those characters. Holdo's plan to tell nobody her plan made absolutely no sense, and of course, the Holdo maneuver made every space battle ever useless. The Canto Bight scenes were complete and utter garbage, and Rose Tico had some of the worst monologues here about animal cruelty and love, and Finn sacrificing himself actually would have served as a nice character arc for him, from The Force Awakens to The Last Jedi, but of course Rose completely ruins this. There are a few positives to this movie. The scene with Yoda was very well done, and the introduction of the Force projection was fine, although I think having Luke die from this was just a complete waste of his character. This movie also looks very nice with the color contrast, the throne room fight, and Crate. It all looks great. Pretty much everything that can be said about this movie already has been said, so let's move on. Number 8 is Solo, a Star Wars story. I actually enjoyed this movie and thought it was pretty fun to watch. We get to see a different side of Star Wars, which is something both anthology films do a very good job at. Seeing the crime syndicates, the Crimson Dawn, and what it's like for somebody who's not at the center of the Galactic Civil War to live in this time period was great. I enjoyed the performances in this movie and thought, they were all fun to watch. The massive flaw here is that none of this feels like Han Solo's backstory. I enjoyed the performances, but they didn't feel like Han Solo and Lando Calrissian. They felt like different characters. When watching this movie, I can't wrap my head around the fact that this is Han Solo, so I think that actually makes it easier for me to enjoy this movie. I feel like if you change the names of all of these characters, the movie would drastically improve. Number 7 is going to be Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. This movie isn't nearly as bad as most people say. It has a lot of intriguing concepts that just weren't handled well by The Last Jedi. Opening the movie with a stormtrooper and showing us that humanity was a nice idea, and it hadn't been seen before in any other Star Wars movies. Sadly, Finn became a character to bounce off the protagonist instead of a really compelling character. Seeing Han Solo again was nice, and I think his death by his own son was executed well. I only wish we would have got to see Han, Leia, and Luke together in one scene in just the prequel trilogy. I would have loved to see that. This movie is enjoyable, but of course when you look into it, you see it follows the same pattern as A New Hope, and really this entire trilogy follows the original trilogy plot map pretty closely. Except the protagonist here is overpowered. Rey didn't train at all, but somehow managed to win against Kylo Ren, who's been training his whole life. Besides a few pretty major issues, this is an enjoyable Star Wars movie. Number 6 is Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Right away here, I want to say that I wish I could put this movie higher. I think this is actually a much better ending to the saga than Rise of Skywalker was. The third act of this movie is stellar, and the fight between Luke and Vader is absolutely amazing, and the final space battle is one of the best in Star Wars. And I think Luke turning to see the Force Ghost is one of the greatest moments in Star Wars and was an absolutely perfect ending. One of my only problems with the third act is that I feel like the Ewoks being able to easily kill Imperials and ATSTs was a bit of a stretch, and the entire middle portion of the movie really drags. And there's a side plot with Ewoks seeing C-3PO as a god, and Luke has to make them float so that they can save themselves. I didn't find that interesting. I think the beginning of this movie is nice, but some of the green screens are outdated, and the plan to save Han also doesn't make much sense, and you can tell this movie probably wasn't made with this entire sequence in mind, because they thought Harrison Ford was going to leave. Everything they do with Luke, Yoda, and the Force in general is incredible in this film. But I found myself questioning some of the decisions plot-wise that had to do with the rebellion. I think all the scenes on Endor look great, and it's an interesting location, but not all of it is executed the greatest. Overall, the ending of this movie is great, but the rest of the movie is just subpar for me. Coming in at number 5 is Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. This movie has a lot of the same problems as Return of the Jedi. Some of the parts in the middle were uninteresting, but the third act was great. But overall, I think I enjoyed the first 2 acts of Rise of Skywalker more than Return of the Jedi, which is what allows it to be higher. I really wish I could like Return of the Jedi more, but I just find the first 2 acts of this movie to be more enjoyable than Return was. And although I do think Rise of Skywalker wrapped up its trilogy much nicer than the entire saga, I don't know if it did the greatest job at that. This movie also had the job of course correcting the mistakes of The Last Jedi, which it handled great. I would have rather had this movie focus on fixing The Last Jedi's errors and being a good movie instead of going along with The Last Jedi and trying to make that mess work. This movie could have been better if The Last Jedi never happened, but J.J. Abrams had the job of fixing those mistakes. People complain about the pacing of this movie, but I found myself easily keeping up with the story and staying engaged with it the entire runtime. This movie essentially makes The Last Jedi a waste of time to watch because it retcons so much of it, and therefore it feels more like a direct sequel to The Force Awakens than it does The Last Jedi. This movie also has a lot of fan service, and I was happy with what we got. I think that J.J. Abrams did the best he could do with what Rian Johnson gave him, and he made a satisfying and entertaining conclusion to the sequel trilogy. Number 4 is going to be Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. This film is what a Disney-era Star Wars movie should be. Every time Disney tries to do something different, they find that they almost always succeed. The Mandalorian is amazing, and of course, Rogue One is one of the best Star Wars movies. This thing is entertaining from start to finish, and you never lose interest in what happens to the characters. I love how this movie shows that not all people in the rebellion are kind hearted. It shows the dirty side of things. People are willing to kill those who are innocent for their cause. Diego Luna does amazing with the role of Cassian, and showing where the lines of good and evil begin to blur. The entire cast of this movie really does a great job, and I loved almost all of the new characters. I especially enjoyed seeing Chirrut and how people can use the Force in a different way. Saw Gerrera was also a nice character that showed people who aren't necessarily part of the rebellion, but they aren't fans of the Empire either. K2SO was also a nice addition to the team and provided humor that is sprinkled really nicely throughout the film. This movie also ties extremely well into A New Hope, basically ending a few minutes before A New Hope begins. It explains how the rebellion and Empire got to where they were. I think that they put the perfect amount of Vader in this film too, on how we got a new iconic line, "Be careful not to choke on your aspirations, director." And the Vader hallway scene at the end just shows how powerful Vader really is. This is definitely the best of the Disney era Star Wars films. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. This movie was my favorite Star Wars film for a long part of my life. Rewatching it, it had a lot lower lows than I remember, but it also had a lot higher highs than I remembered. Yes, the dialogue is clunky, but the story is amazing. This is what all of the prequels should have been. The Clone Wars should have been the main conflict, and it should have been about the rise of Anakin Skywalker and his fall into Darth Vader. The opening of this movie shows that the CGI has greatly improved from the last 2 films, and we get to see depth in space battles. We get some new iconic lines, and the banter between Anakin and Obi-Wan shows how much closer they have grown through the Clone Wars. The lightsaber fight between Anakin and Dooku serves as a great introduction to the conflict of Anakin being consumed by the dark side. There are some scenes in the middle of this movie that could have been better. I always remember thinking the fight between Obi-Wan and Grievous was great, but there's a horrible zooming shot onto their eyes at the beginning, and the lightsaber fight turns into a weird chase after a few seconds. It's still an enjoyable scene, and the concept of it is good enough. This movie really starts to get good once we see Anakin confront the Chancellor. When Anakin finally makes the turn to the dark side, we get some incredible stuff after this. The Order 66 scene is packed with emotion, and watching Anakin kill younglings and storm the Jedi Temple was executed perfectly. The final battles of this film are stunning. Watching the Master of Evil versus the Master of Light, Palpatine versus Yoda in the Senate chamber was very entertaining. We also get to see what finally broke Yoda, what sent him into exile. He watched all of the Jedi get slaughtered, and he miserably lost to Palpatine. We get to see he lost his lightsaber, and he can't fight anymore. Now, the scene with Anakin and Padme before Obi-Wan appears on Mustafar does have clunky dialogue, but it is way more emotional than I remembered. It was a very powerful moment, and when Obi-Wan appears, that emotion doesn't go away at all. You can see the pain with every stroke of a lightsaber throughout this fight. I don't even mind when the lava gets involved because of how intense this is. I'll admit the fight at the end of episode 1 was better choreographed and felt less like a spin battle than this one, but the emotion here is what makes the duel so good. When Obi-Wan finally defeats Anakin and he can't kill him himself is beautiful. Say what you want about Hayden Christensen's acting, but the final "I hate you" had all the emotion it needed. This movie is what all of the prequels should have been, and I think if you look past some of the dialogue, the tone and emotion of this movie is perfect. Number 2 is going to be Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. I have never been a real lover of Empire, but after re-watching this film, it is so much better than I remember. The opening sequence on Hoth is probably the best opening to any Star Wars film ever. The cinematography on the planet is beautiful, and the Imperial probe droids speak this code language that gives them a sense of mystery. For some reason, I've always loved the shots of Han and Luke on the Tauntauns. It just looks amazing. Seeing Luke physically use the Force to grab something on screen for the first time shows how far he's come. Han and Leia also have an excellent start, showing the fighting between them, which also serves as a way to propel their relationship forward. Once we get off Hoth, we see Luke go to Dagobah. These are some of the best and most quotable Star Wars scenes. Dagobah has a perfect atmosphere. The mystery really helps with Yoda's character. Speaking of Yoda, everything about him in this movie is great. The introduction, the lines, the fact that you believe he's some silly comic relief alien before you learn he is the Jedi Master Yoda, his communication with Obi-Wan, his training methods. The only downside to this movie is that some of the scenes on Bespin are a little uninteresting, and I don't care much for them. However, the final battle between Luke and Vader is incredible. Obviously, the final twist is one of the most shocking reveals in all of cinema. This movie also ends perfectly. The Empire really did strike back. Han is frozen in carbonite, possibly dead. The rebellion is significantly weakened, and Luke was just utterly defeated by Vader. Number 1 is going to be Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. This movie is Star Wars. It is a masterpiece, and almost every aspect of the film is perfect. The opening shot is iconic, and immediately we are put on this vibrant ship. We are introduced to Darth Vader, one of the most menacing villains of all time. Every scene in this movie is absolutely incredible. The movie is filled with so many of the greatest Star Wars moments, and that's really what puts it on top for me. I absolutely love Alec Guinness as Ben Kenobi. Looking at the way he describes Anakin to Luke, it's almost like Alec Guinness saw the prequel trilogy. The atmosphere at Mos Eisley was nailed by George Lucas. Seeing all those odd creatures with that iconic Cantina band playing in the background sets up this alien galaxy. Han Solo and Luke have some great back and forth dialogue, especially once we reach the Death Star. Speaking of which, the Death Star is done wonderfully, and the Empire is menacing. We see that they can destroy planets, we see Vader, and we see Grand Moff Tarkin's authority. The only downside I can think of is that the lightsaber duel between Vader and Obi-Wan, but what it lacks in choreography, it gains in emotion. Knowing the history between these two and the fact that they have long passed their primes, the duel still carries tons of emotional weight. It's not unbelievable to think that this was the most they could do. What follows this is the trench run, and I still think that it holds up today. I love every aspect of this movie, and it deserves every bit of success it gets. So that was my ranking of all of the theatrically released Star Wars films. I hope you guys enjoyed. I did change appearance because this was pretty long to film. So yeah, that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed the ranking. Bye.